حي على الفلاح. The Prophet ﷺ, he claimed he was a true messenger of God. He spoke about the defeat of Rome and Persia. What we have is we have a narration from him. During the Battle of Khandaq, there was a massive rock and the Sahaba couldn't break the rock. So they called the Prophet ﷺ, who was physically very strong, and he came and he struck the rock. And what did he tell the Sahaba? He said, you're going to conquer Syria, you're going to conquer Persia, you are going to conquer Yemen. He made it very explicitly clear. And this is at the time when the Muslims were just in Medina and they were surrounded by 10,000 of their army. And there was no other Muslims in Arabia, which is incredible when you think about it, because the munafiqs, they were the ones who were actually saying, this man talks about victory when we cannot go to the toilet without arrows being shot at us. Yet this is exactly what happened. The Muslims, after he died, they conquered Rome, they conquered Persia, they conquered the areas of Syria and Yemen, which were under Roman control. They beat them all. What's interesting is what Barnbury Rogerson says about this astonishing event. And he said the equivalent today and the equivalent at that time is, imagine today, Eskimos rise up and they take on Russia and they take on USA. That's how significant the Sahaba and their victories against Rome and Persia was. It was completely unpredictable. Another time a man came up to the Prophet ﷺ and said, tell me about the hour. The Prophet said, the one asked knows no more of it than the one asking. Then the man said, tell me about its signs. And the Prophet said, that you see the barefooted, unclothed herdsmen competing in the construction of tall buildings. Very explicitly clear, falsifiable, concrete, accurate, risky. Risky. Why is it risky? Because who had a tradition of building tall buildings? The Hagia Sophia, which is in Istanbul, this was built before this prophecy. And this is an extravagant tall building. The Romans had tall buildings, the Persians had tall buildings, the Indians had tall buildings, the Chinese had tall buildings, the Mayans had tall buildings. The Prophet ﷺ could have said, they are going to compete with each other with tall buildings. However, he didn't say them. He actually pointed towards a certain type of Arab, the Bedouin Arabs. Now the Bedouin Arabs were the people of the desert. The prophecy is so clear that hundreds of years ago, Imam Nawawi says this, and remember he's from the 13th century. He said the people of the desert and their like are the people of need and poverty. Everybody knows that. A time will come in the world when the world will be laid open for them until they compete with each other in the construction of tall buildings, and Allah knows best. So the Prophet ﷺ is talking about a group of people who didn't even have houses, and he's saying they are going to compete with each other with tall buildings. Now what's interesting about this prophecy as well, the Prophet ﷺ and in the Quran, it's not good to have extravagant tall buildings. In fact, the Prophet's own mosque, when it became too big for the people worshipping there, the Sahaba wanted to build it, extend it, and the Prophet didn't want that. In the Quran, Allah says, do you build on every high a monument? Vain is what you do. And you make strong fortresses as if you will live you'd live forever. So if it was a prophecy which the Prophet ﷺ wanted to come true, he would have said it about the city Arabs, which were the Sahaba, and told them, and it would have been his sunnah to build tall buildings. He didn't tell people to do that. In fact, it was the opposite. However, today the tallest buildings in the world, in terms of percentage-wise where they're built, is in the Middle East, is in the areas of the Bedouin Arabs. What's interesting is that they discovered the black oil, the gold, which was something that made them go from overnight from camels to Cadillacs, instantly. Now who was ruling this area before the Bedouins? Turks, 600 years. Oil was discovered which made them super rich after the collapse of the Ottomans. If that oil was discovered when the Ottoman Empire was still there, do you think the Bedouin Arabs would have been building these tall buildings? Because they wouldn't have had the money. In fact, what we know from the Ottoman history is that they were great administrators and they wouldn't have built vain buildings like this. They actually, they had a complete different paradigm. Yeah, these people overnight, they went from being extremely poor to extremely rich, which is why you find them spending a huge amount of money, and for them, money doesn't mean anything. You literally have people alive today who are billionaires whose ancestors, just going back 2 or 3 generations, had nothing but camels and milk and goat and dates. I can go on and on about prophecies. One last one before we carry on. The Prophet ﷺ said, ahead of the hour, people will only greet those whom they know. Trade will become so widespread that a woman will help her husband in his trade. Ties of kingship will be severed. People will bear false witness and conceal true testimony, and the pen will prevail. Here the Prophet ﷺ talking about trade, severing of ties, the increase of literacy, right, with the pen prevailing. We could do a whole dars, a whole clear explanation of this hadith and just how it fits with the world today. But what I want to say next may sound a bit controversial to you. If I give you 50 prophecies which were confirmed, that's not enough. What if I was to tell you, if there was 1 million prophecies of the Prophet ﷺ where he said things which were risky, unpredictable, falsifiable, chronological order, and they were confirmed, what if I was to tell you 1 million of them is not enough? Would you say I'm right or wrong? Wrong. If we think miracles, prophecies are enough, we should all follow Dajjal. Because he's going to give you, in front of your very eyes, things that supposedly look dead come back to life. He's going to command the sky to rain and it's going to look like it's raining. He is going to do things which is going to confuse the hell out of you. So why are we not going to follow Dajjal? Because he's doing miracles, and we also have the miracles of the Prophet, but he's doing miracles. What's the difference? The difference is the theology. What is his theology? Who's God? He's God. The theology of the Prophet ﷺ is that Allah is worthy of worship. It doesn't matter if a man comes like him and says, here's a miracle, here's a prediction, here's this. If the fundamental theology is false, we don't care if it's 1 million miracles. So we will believe in the Prophet ﷺ even if he didn't come with any prophecies because of his theology. But if he comes with prophecies, they only add to the proof of prophethood. What's interesting in the world today is that the new atheist movement, this liberal, atheistic, humanistic movement which is sweeping the Western world, they are priming the world to accept, without them understanding what they're doing, the message of the person on the previous slide. What is their message? Firstly, rejection. Rejection of who? Rejection of God and religions. 2, what's their other message? Materialism. What's Dajjal's main thing? Who's going to be attracted to him? People who are affected by materialism. Whenever they talk about why the Western world is supposedly better, when they make the arguments about the Western world, and of course we're not saying East versus West and clash of civilization, anything like that. What we're saying is that their argument is, look at us, look at the technology we have, look at the money we have. So fueling materialism, rejecting God, rejecting religions, making the sacred unsacred. The third unholy trinity here is their focus on empiricism. We will only see what we believe. We want the miracle now. We don't want to believe, oh God, we can't see God. I want to see God. If they want a physical God, that's what Dajjal is going to be. And if you look at Surah Kahf, look at the messages in that surah. In fact, many of the messages, they exactly correlate with a counter to the new atheist sort of priming. One of the messages in this surah is materialism. Is it not? The man with the garden, right? One of the messages is to believe in the unseen, which is the story of the people of the cave, which is something they deny. And also, one of the things here is about the man who he believes in his physical resources more than Allah. And he says, I do not think the day of judgment will come. Again, empiricism. So what you find is rejection, materialism, and empiricism. All three of these things are denied explicitly in this surah. Because this surah, when we're supposed to recite it in protection for the Dajjalic worldview, for Dajjal, it's the meaning. It's not just the sounds, it's the meaning. And the meaning is, interestingly enough, what the new atheist movement is actually priming the world towards. Human beings, we sociologically conform to our society. We do what other people do. You go to a different country, you slowly start acting like them, talking like them, dressing like them. However, what's interesting is this. The Prophet ﷺ raised the flag of Tawheed in a land of shirk on his own, because the Arab society was a society which economically, politically, socially, culturally relied upon shirk. They loved their ancestors and they loved their idols. And they came up to the Prophet and they said, we'll give you money, women, wealth, power, whatever you want to give up your message. He refused and he maintained La ilaha illallah. Now, to a man which everything materialistically you can imagine, he is refusing it. And that man for us is a true messenger of Allah based upon his character, because he cannot be a liar. He hasn't got the psychology of that. He cannot be insane because of the product of the Quran and the Sunnah, which clearly cannot be the product of an insane mind. So he has to be speaking the truth. And for us, it is enough knowledge of his character is proof of his prophethood. The prophecies, which I spoke about, which are wonderful and great, that's, if you like, an additional argument. And what I'd like to end upon is this. Who in this ummah had the greatest iman? Abu Bakr as-Siddiq. Why was he called that name? So when somebody came up to him and said, this is what your prophet is claiming, that he went up to heaven and he came back and he went to Jerusalem in the same night, what did he say in return? If he said it, it's true. And his name we remember today as Abu Bakr as-Siddiq. Did he know about these prophecies? These were later. For us, it is enough of his life, his tawheed, his message, which is a message which resonates with the fitrah, which is enough to prove he is the messenger of God. And that's why we will follow the Prophet and not follow Dajjal. Everything good I've said is from Allah, every mistake is from myself. Jazakallah khair for listening.